Good evening. First and foremost, I wanted to welcome each of you to tonight. I do understand from feedback to my text messages that there were some technical difficulties that a number of you had getting on, but it seems that people eventually get there. So we appreciate your patience with regard to that. St Kilda Shule prides itself on starting things punctually, so we are going to start now because we respect everyone's time. This evening, we're going to be having a conversation and hearing three different perspectives about a critically important issue, namely that of Jewish education. It does not require any advanced level of knowledge in the Jewish religion to know instinctively that Jewish education is indispensable and central to everything that we believe. Our characterization as a people of the book was not created in a vacuum, but obviously it's something that has been attributed to the Jewish people intergenerationally for centuries because of the value that we place on a Jewish education for our children. That obviously creates a challenge in the 21st century when the cost of living has gone up astronomically. It is very rare for families with a single income and often even a double income to be able to easily afford private Jewish day schools, if we're going to call a spade a spade. This has been an issue that has been going on for many, many years, if not decades. And we are very fortunate that at the moment there is a concerted effort by a group of communal leaders who have, with great effort and determination, a lot of time and volunteership, as well as an enormous amount of goodwill and in good faith, are embarking on a mission to try and bring this issue to the fore and to create practical, viable and pragmatic solutions. It's in this context that we are delighted to welcome three panelists this evening, plus our moderator. A very brief introduction, and we'll limit the introductions so that we can have more time for conversation. We'll be joined tonight by Ellen Schwartz, AM, who is the Managing Director of the Troala Group, which is a group that was founded by Alan and his wife, Carol, and he is the chairperson of the Jewish Schools Project Committee. Welcome, Alan. We'll also be hearing tonight from Kate Beakinsfield. Kate is the Managing Director of Ripe Maternity. She is a parent of children at Bialik College, and in the context of tonight, she is also the president of Bialik College. We're delighted to welcome you as well, Kate. Anton Block is a past president of both the Jewish Community Council of Victoria and the Executive Council of Australian Jewry. He is currently the president of the St Kilda Hebrew Congregation, but he will be speaking tonight not in any official capacity representing any of those organizations, but rather as an individual, a parent of children who have oscillated between the private Jewish day school system and the public school system, and he'll be sharing his story. After each of the three panelists share their words, which each will have 10 minutes to speak, I'm going to invite Rochelle Unreich, who is a freelance journalist and also a board member of the St Kilda Shule, to moderate the questions and answers. So with no further ado, I'm going to invite Alan to please unmute and share with us your workings on this very important report that has been widely distributed in the community.
Thank you, Yaakov, and welcome to you all. We've got a small group, and I'm assuming, looking around, and I know some of you, that many of you have already read a lot that's been written about this. So I'm going to assume a fair bit of knowledge, and I'm just going to fairly quickly go through the issues that were raised, what the working group is, what the issues that were raised, and what the options were that we proposed, and give you a little bit further background on what our thinking is, the sort of feedback we've had to date, and what our plans might be for the future. So I'll speak for probably significantly less than 10 minutes, because I want to allow as much time as possible for conversation. So about 2 years ago, maybe a bit less, I convened a working group comprising about 9 eminent people in our community who'd had past involvement with Jewish schools, but no longer involved. From Yavna, people from Bialik, King David, and Mount Scopus College, backgrounds in those areas. I asked them to join the working group on the basis that we were going to pretend that we owned the 4 schools. we're going to think as owners of the 4 schools and not as fiduciaries, if you like, of any of the schools. But what would we do if we were suddenly and miraculously given responsibility and power to run the 4 schools? And they all agreed to do that because it seemed like an interesting exercise to see whether a custodial approach to the 4 schools, which are clearly owned individually by their various boards and constitutional structures, to actually think communally. So they agreed to do that. And I also agreed with them that we would never do anything without consensus. So we would move slowly if we had to move slowly, but we would always maintain consensus. And to date, we've been able to do that. It's been a struggle, and that's probably explains why you'll see from the report that we have absolute agreement about what the problems are, but it's not that we couldn't agree on an option, but we all agreed that it was best not to recommend an option, rather than once you do that, then you get tainted, if you like, and suddenly you can't be objective anymore. You're starting to defend a point of view, and that's not helpful. We thought that the important thing to do was to get the community to start thinking deeply about what its future might be and be patient about what the outcomes might be. Once we produced the final draft report, probably about 4 months ago, we approached the leading philanthropists in our community to support a 12-month project of getting us the first report from draft to final and published, then to get the Australian Centre for Jewish Civilization to do a community consultation, and then to do further analysis and then publish a report in 2022. So we've got really most, if not all, of the major leading philanthropists supporting us, which is fabulous. So the issues that we raised, of course, you all know them. I'm going to say them and I'm going to describe them briefly. There's affordability. The cost is exorbitant and almost inaccessible to people who are not either fabulously wealthy or come from fabulously wealthy families and supported by others. That's full fees. I acknowledge that the schools don't get full fees from everyone. I'm talking about full fees. The shift away from Jewish schools because of values and what people value and the sort of sacrifices they're prepared to make or not make to send their children to a Jewish school. Population projections, which are absolutely critical. I'll describe those in a bit more detail in a moment, and the impact on our schools and what that is. So basically, affordability, in a technical sense, a family that earns $200,000 a year who send 3 children to a Jewish day school would spend 60% of their after-tax income, which is ridiculous. That family doesn't exist because you can't live on 40% of your after-tax income. And so the affordability is a real problem because we've got those who can afford, who sacrifice enormously, and then others who either can't afford or quite reasonably are not prepared to sacrifice everything else in their lives, their houses and everything else, in order to be able to afford a Jewish education. So we've got affordability pressures. There's a shift away from Jewish schools, and we all know that, and the statistics are all in the report. We had 30% in primary school, in government schools in 2006, and it was 38% by 2016, and it continues to grow. They're just 2 census points. Then we've got population projections. I want to spend a bit longer on that because it is estimated, not estimated, but forecast from the census and the demographic analysis, which has been done in Sydney and Melbourne independently, that there'll be a 23% decline in the number of school-aged Jewish children in the Jewish school system over the next 20 years. And that's, we talked to Andrew Marcus, who's a very highly respected economist and social scientist and demographer. He'll tell you that it's not even controversial. That is going to happen because it's the shape of the population pyramid of our Jewish community means that the number of childbearing women in our community now is going to its lowest point, and that cohort will move through over the next 20 years, have children, and those children will be less because they are less women of childbearing age in our community than there ever has been. It's quite a complex argument. It's explained in the report. I urge you not to reject that if you find it implausible, but actually to have a look at the report for yourself, talk to people, finally send me an email if you want to, because this is really important that people understand that, because the effect of that is that it's going to reduce income for the schools by $10 million a year in 10 years' time, and by $18.5 million a year in 20 years' time. That's even assuming that the current trends away from Jewish schools because of values and because of affordability, even if those remain constant, just the number of available children alone will reduce the incomes of the schools by between $10 and $18 million. So the effect of that is less students, therefore less students to cover the fixed costs, therefore fees go up, and therefore less students, and it's a vicious cycle. And we want to work out how to reverse that vicious cycle so that there are more students, higher fees collected, therefore less fees per student required, fees lower, etc., etc. As you can see, I'm moving through this quickly because I really want to give you I want to hear what you've got to say rather than you hear what I've got to say, because we've already said it all. We've had it in our report and it's been all over the place. So the challenge is very simply, we've got excess capacity in our schools at the moment, and it's going to get worse. The junior school classes have empty seats. Now, an empty seat in a class is, if you think about it, if you put a child into that seat, even if that child paid, take a ridiculously low number, $5,000 a year, the government would also contribute anything from $5,000 to $8,000. So that child, that empty seat cost the school anything from $10,000 to $20,000 a year. And if you multiply that by the number of empty classes in our junior schools, you get a very large number. In VCE, we've got subjects which have got as little as 3, 4, 5, 6 children. So you'll have 4 of those classes run across those 4 schools, each of which have a very, very low number. And in VCE, it's not possible for the schools to reduce the subject choice, because then the parents of those children are likely, possibly, to send their children to a private non-government school where they will get more subject choice. So the problem is that costs in schools are primarily fixed. And so therefore, because we haven't got enough students and the situation is getting worse, you have to spread that cost amongst a fewer number of people, which means the fees go up, which means people go out, and that's the vicious cycle that we believe we're in. And that's what we want to alert the community to. It's nobody's fault. It's just a fact. We're not blaming anyone. It's just a fact. So we've looked at 4 options. Importantly, our first option is the status quo, because it's important to acknowledge that we have 4 magnificent schools, each of which are different and provide a different experience. They perceive themselves to be different, and to a large extent, they are different and very different. And any of the options that we're proposing, except maybe the Fee Assessment Board, reduces choice, forces schools to compromise on things that they regard as being really valuable to their parents and to their students. So I think we've got to put it out there. We do have an option to keep going the way we are, but we've got to confront what that means in terms of fees, in terms of what pressure it's going to put on our philanthropic community, and the, if you like, the increasing haves and have-nots, if you like, in Jewish education in our community. So it is an option. The other option is to merge 4 schools into 2. You could do that from kindergarten through to 12, or you could do it just at junior school, or you could do it just at senior school. So you could have 2 senior schools and 4 junior schools. There's any combination that you want, and then you have to play around with real estate and, you know, all the logistics that come out of those different permutations and combinations. That was too complicated for us to model, because there was too much information that we didn't have about what the options were. So we basically know intuitively, and we all know, that if you share costs and if you have fuller classes, you're going to have more choice, more diversity, and lower fees. And then we had another idea that we fully costed, which was to create a single combined VCE school for the whole community from years 10, 11, and 12. a brand new school. It wouldn't be any of the 4 schools. It would be the David Ben-Gurion School, or whatever name we came up for it. And it would be a feeder school for the 4 remaining schools. Those 4 schools would exit VCE, if you like, and they would only have junior schools from K through to 9. And then in year 10, all the children of our community would come together onto a single campus. We actually got architects to design it for us, and it would be 3 stories. It would require 7,000 square metres. And the effect of it, according to our modelling, was that we could reduce fees from VCE fees from between 35 and 40,000, which is what they are, to 25,000, which makes it very accessible for many families because they really value the VCE education. Just as a little aside, there's a big trend at the moment, and the schools will confirm this. Jewish parents send their children to a Jewish kindergarten, then take them out and they send them to the local government school from prep through to year 7, 6, 7, 8, 9, depending on demand and supply. Then they sneak them back into a Jewish school because they want to make sure that their children get the best possible, effectively, secular education, VCE score, if you like, which is all a bit weird in my mind, but that's what's happening. And if we could create a combined VCE school that was only 25,000, I think there'd be a huge appetite for that in the community of people, even if they choose not to send their children to Jewish schools in their junior years. Now, again, expressing a personal view, I think the Jesuits were right, and give me a child till they're 7 and I'll show you the adult. I find it very strange that parents think that they can send their children in their youth, in their most impressionable years, to a government school and then send them to a Jewish school to get a great VCE score. Doesn't actually make sense to me. It should be the opposite, but that's just a personal view, and I don't know what we can do about that. The next option was greater collaboration between the schools, and we had 2 things there. We had a VCE Academy, and the VCE Academy is based on the premise that there are between 15 and 20 subjects run by those 4 schools, each of which are subscale. So what you could do is we'll do French in King David, and we'll do art in Bialik, and we'll do this, and what we'll do is we'll ship the kids around, and they'll do more Zoom classes, etc., etc. And the effect of that will be to reduce costs. And yes, it would. I'm personally not keen on that, but it is an option. It would probably reduce costs by several $100,000. So, because there'd be a lot of extra costs as well in all the logistics. And the final one was a fee assessment board, which is getting a lot of traction. A lot of parents are coming to us to tell us that they love it and they would love to participate in it. And that relates to the problem that the schools are jammed because on one hand, what they do is they generously discount fees for those who really can't afford the school fees. In other words, the people who are least able to pay. But then they've got a problem in the middle ground where some people are prepared to sacrifice everything for a Jewish education and eat bread and cheese, whatever it takes. And other people say that's not reasonable. Yes, I could afford the school fees, but it would mean that I'd have to live in Oakley. It would mean that I can't ever take a holiday. I'm not prepared to do that. So what happens is that the schools are then caught because they've got a bunch of parents. You've got those who can afford the full fees, which is great. They're either doing really well, or they've got grandparents who support them or whatever. But then you've got the ones in the middle, and they bifurcate into 2 groups. So the school, and then the school has empty seats, and you say to the schools, you've got empty seats, why don't you fill them? And they say, well, it'd be difficult because we couldn't discount to those people because the people who are really trying hard to pay the fees would resent that. So they're caught in a bit of a difficult situation. So our suggestion is that every school should agree that we will not do discounting. We will not. What we'll have is a full fee. Anybody who can't afford a full fee goes to an independent fee assessment board in a highly dignified way, in an anonymous way. They're assessed for what they can pay, and then they have a right to go to the school for what they can pay. They may decide that they don't want to go for what they've been assessed for, and they can throw that certificate in the bin, or they can say, well, I've been assessed for 18,000, I'll do it. And then they can go to the school of their choice, and the normal enrolment procedures. Obviously, it's the prerogative of the school to reject people on other criterion. That's entirely up to them, but not on financial terms. The effect of that would be to protect the schools against the criticism from those who are really trying hard to pay fees and making enormous sacrifices, because this will be a community decision. Now, this is something that's gained so much traction that I don't want to go into the details of it, but as we go into it more and more, we're discovering the problems and we're solving problems as we go through. So that's something I'm happy to have a conversation about. It's an interesting idea. It's got a few warts on it. It's got a few challenges and a few problems, but I think we could probably sort most of those problems out. So what's happened is, I think you've seen the coverage. We've got the Australian Centre for Jewish Civilization doing their work. I'm doing a whole bunch of these webinars and Zoom calls. We've got a Facebook face with 1,400 people, quite active, and we've got several hundred people signed up on our website. And our plan now is probably to publish an interim update in October or November after Monash gives us their report, and then next June come out with our 2022 report. What we're looking to do is to find common ground in the community. We won't find perfect common ground, because no one will ever agree to anything entirely. But when we get an overwhelming consensus that something makes sense, we'll act and we'll push it through to the best of our ability. But what we're not going to do is set ourselves up for failure and say, oh, this school ought to merge with that school, because everyone will just start shouting and we'll achieve very little. So that's our strategy. It's a long game. Educate the community, bring people along, create a coalition of people who understand that we must find a general consensus for doing something. And when we get that general consensus, we'll push on and make it happen. So thanks for your time, and I hope I wasn't over 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, Alan. I do appreciate that, and for that insight. And I encourage anyone who hasn't yet read the report to please do so. It's available on the website and has been widely distributed. Alan, that was a very succinct and insightful window into the project and what you're trying to achieve, and we very much appreciate that. I also just wanted to apologize. I've received quite a few messages that for some reason there was trouble getting on. We've tried to fix it, so the numbers have come up since then, which is good. It is being recorded, and I'll ensure to publish that recording for anyone who wants to watch it afterwards. Our next speaker is Kate Beaconsfield, who I introduced earlier. Kate, we're delighted to have you here, and I'm going to hand over to you now to speak from the perspective of Bialik College. No doubt you'll be expressing the sentiments echoed by some of the other schools mentioned in the report as well.
Thank you, Rabbi. Tonight I'm speaking about on behalf of Bialik College, and although I have regular contact with the other school presidents, it's not appropriate to speak on their behalf tonight. Alan first reached out to Bialik about mid-2019 to let us know about his plans to research the current and future landscape of Jewish schooling in Melbourne, with a particular focus on affordability. And we were really pleased to hear that, because on Bialik Council, we've been very focused on affordability, particularly over the last 5 years. We are grateful to Alan, Nahama, and others involved in this report for leading this important conversation for our community. We have found the Jewish Schools Project Working Group future-focused, respectful of current efforts, and creative in future solutions. And we understand that the other 3 schools were similarly supportive. In Melbourne, our Jewish schools are the envy of many diaspora communities across the globe. We offer a rich diversity of Jewish learning with vibrant informal ed departments and outstanding educational outcomes. I feel incredibly blessed to live in a community that has such a wide array of wonderful Jewish educational offerings. Jewish schools are an investment in our future. Our schools help to foster a sense of togetherness amongst Jewish families, which help to build a community. They also reinforce the whole family's Jewish traditions within the home, creating an indelible Jewish identity. So no wonder so many families want to send their children to a Jewish school. It's interesting to note that attendance at Melbourne Jewish schools is already more than double the rate of Victorian students attending other fee-paying independent schools. This rate of inclusion, somewhere around 70%, is unprecedented in the diaspora, and it's an achievement that Melbourne Jewish community should be really proud of. But there is no hiding from the fact that the cost of such an education feels prohibitive to many families. We know that these costs are outpacing wage growth. And at Bialik, costs per student have increased 14% over the past 5 years. Higher fees put a strain on household budgets, and many families are finding it increasingly difficult to pay school fees. So what are we doing about it? As I mentioned, Bialik has been very focused on ways to address affordability. It's at the top of most council meeting agendas. Our college has a philosophy that no Jewish child should be denied a Jewish education due to their parents' inability to pay school fees. This is underpinned by our generous fee assistance program, which I'll talk a bit more about later. Costs of running any schools are high, and for Bialik staff salaries make up over 80% of expenses. This means it's hard to reduce costs without compromising the educational offering. We don't want to water down the quality of our provision, as many families choose Jewish schools, in part because of the incredible academic outcomes and range of opportunities for our children. If this was significantly impacted by cutting staff ratios, it would likely to cause enrolment issues, which in turn puts upward pressure on school fees. Around our council table, we refer a lot to the middle band, that group of families whose children are not receiving fee assistance, but who still find it challenging to afford school fees. We define these families by a number of dimensions: income bracket, number of children, access to assets and funds, expense trends, but also by the importance they place on Jewish education and the sacrifices that they are prepared to make so that their children can attend a Jewish school like Bialik. These families feel financially squeezed as school fees rise each year due to year-level bracket creep and also to annual fee increases. One of Council's biggest challenges is to ensure that these middle-income families are not squeezed totally out, especially with the predicted demographic changes facing the community over the next 20 years. We often have this middle band of families in mind when we try to tackle affordability challenges. I'd like to share with you some of the initiatives we have undertaken. Council has set itself strategic aims, with affordability being an important one of them. We have limited fee increases to levels well below cost increases, such as teachers' salaries. Over the past 3 years, our average fee rise has been about 2%, compared to our competitors that were closer to 4%. Continued management of fee rises has seen Bialik's fees going from the most expensive to now being lower than 2 of the other Jewish schools in the report. We have substantially increased sibling discounts. And in 2020, during Melbourne's lockdowns, we provided multiple broad-based COVID discounts for all families. We targeted the middle band and fee-assisted families by providing an option to opt out of the discount for those who could still afford full fees. We continue to offer financial and technology support to those families who are under financial distress during the pandemic. Some of the strategic initiatives are more long-term. We have held brainstorming sessions to creatively explore strategic game changers to radically reduce costs or improve affordability. We have targeted approach to donors via our significantly enhanced foundation function for assistance with bursaries and scholarships. In the past, we've also held discussions with other Melbourne Jewish schools about ways to reduce costs through collaborations, including having conversations about some of the big ideas mentioned in this report. An example of this is that several years ago, Bialik and King David shared some teaching BCE subjects to try and reduce costs, exactly as Alan explained earlier. We have established an affordability working group with representatives from our executive, finance, marketing, fee assistance, parents association. So all those committees working together to try and find a way forward. These initiatives are designed to assist the current generation, but also to ensure that Jewish day schools is an affordable option for generations to come. I hope that hearing about these initiatives, you can see that Bialik is working towards reducing the financial hardship that many parents face in sending their kids to a Jewish school. However, I do not want to give the impression that the Bialik Council feels like we've done enough to address affordability. We by no means think our job is complete. I'd now like to speak briefly about Bialik's fee assistance program, the core of what we do to ensure that no Jewish child is denied an education on financial grounds. Apart from salaries, this assistance is our greatest expense and one that we're very proud of. Currently, above 23% of Bialik children are supported with means-tested fee assistance through a confidential and respectful process. An additional percentage do not pay full fees due to staff discounts and scholarships. Our college has families with a wide range of incomes, including about 40 children whose families are in receipt of a healthcare card and therefore have a total family income of below $70,000. Regarding the classic family quoted by the Jewish school and that Alan just mentioned earlier, a family earning $200,000 with 3 children in Jewish schools is paying the 60% of post-tax income in fees. We agree that would be staggering and almost an impossible burden. And we do have many such families at Bialik, but they pay far less than 60% of their post-tax income on fees, since under our fee assistance program, their fees are adjusted to match their means. Fee assistance can be something that addresses the changing circumstances of families' finance. A recent example is where a school provided assistance at a critical time for a family who lost a major portion of its income, who then returned to full fees once the oldest child finished school, despite this being challenging financially. This demonstrates the attitude of many middle band families. We don't see fee assistance as a burden. It helps us accomplish our mission, which is to educate as many Jewish students as possible. Fee-assisted students also bring additional revenue into the college, and so even through just a purely financial lens, they're an asset and not a liability. So we want all families. We want to welcome all families, and we don't want any Jewish child to miss out on such a wonderful education. The report speaks about demographic changes that predict a 25% drop in Jewish school-aged children over the next 20 years. But imagine if we can attract more students from the public schools into the Jewish schools. We could reverse that trend, and our total number of students could actually increase rather than decrease over the next few decades. And I really hope that tonight's conversation and this ongoing conversation gives us a pathway to that outcome. It's interesting to note that Bialik includes a more diverse socioeconomic range of families than many state schools. This is clearly shown by the Vce scores, which are the government's measure of socioeconomic backgrounds of students. Public schools around us have a higher Vce score, so therefore higher income than Bialik. And so many families at Bialik could simply not afford to live in the zone around our school or around any of the other 3 schools mentioned in the report. All schools receive funding from both the federal and state governments, and the amount of funds received per child is based on a range of factors. All 4 schools receive significantly less funds than most independent and Catholic schools, which is why a direct comparison to their fees is not very helpful. For schools receiving much higher government grants per child, it makes a lot of sense to have a strategy to fill up available places with students paying very low fees. This is not as simple as Alan alluded to when the government income is much lower and we have other families in the school with the same income paying a higher amount. But we are all aiming, all 4 of our schools are aiming to fill up the classrooms, to spread and therefore reduce the costs per child. Jewish schools have additional costs in running their school provisions, which includes Jewish studies, informal ed departments, shluchim, Hebrew immersion, and other opportunities for children. Jewish education does not only come from Jewish schools, but from within the home, at Shule, or from other organisations such as UJEB and Maccabi. If students do depart Bialik's ELC for non-Jewish schools, our principal writes to them to suggest contacting these organisations as a way to maintain a connection to Jewish learning, life cycle events, and Jewish social interaction. I'd also like to point out that all Melbourne Jewish day schools, and in particular Bialik, have a high number of NCCD students or students with a disability compared to other independent schools. These children are nurtured and included to ensure that they not only achieve their potential, but also remain included in the Jewish community and receive a Jewish education. At Bialik, it's close to a staggering 30% of our students. Whilst many Melbourne Jewish day schools have great ATARs, they do so with a high number of students with disabilities and focus more on the kids achieving their goals rather than cutting them out to try and protect the ATAR. This makes the academic achievements all the more impressive when comparing to other schools. We have followed the insightful conversations on social media post the release of this report, and one comment particularly resonated with us. People who work hard, have professional, established careers, and earn above the average wage, but who have no help from grandparents, struggle to pay Jewish school fees. We hear you, and we would encourage such families to come and talk with us or talk with the other Jewish schools, as we would love the opportunity to speak with you about how we can make a Jewish education for your children possible. The Bialik leadership want to continue to listen to feedback from the broader community and for our minds to stay open. In closing, I'd like to say that we look forward to working with our community to continue this conversation and work together to develop solutions to this important topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate, for that insight into Bialik College's efforts. And I know that you are only able to speak on behalf of Bialik College, but having discussed this matter with some of the other principals, I know that they share similar sentiments, and we thank you very much for that. And I'd also note, just from the St Kilda Shule angle, I guess, we do have a particularly high number of bar mitzvahs through St Kilda Shule, and quite a significant percentage of those do come from Bialik. So it's wonderful to have that indirect connection to your school as well. Our third and final speaker for the evening, before I hand over to Rochelle to ask some questions of the panelists and then, of course, open to the audience, is Anton Block, who I've introduced before, who's going to share his lived experience as a parent of children who have attended both schools. So Anton, over to you.
Thanks, Rabbi Glassman, and good evening to everybody. So I've been reflecting quite a bit on what I might talk about. Let me say this firstly. Any comments and views that I express tonight are my own. They are not the views of any organization that I may currently be the president of or have been the president of in the past. Although certainly my experiences as a president of a number of other organizations in the past might influence some of my thinking in this regard, and I might make some comments in respect of all of that. Can I also say, by way of introduction, that currently I have 3 children. There's no plans to have any more. But one of my children is at Bialik College, and 2 of my children are at Mount Scopus College. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt that both schools are outstanding, that my children are receiving an outstanding education and an outstanding Jewish experience at their respective schools, and I am eternally grateful for that. That said, it's been a bit of a journey to get to the point where I can afford to send my children to a Jewish day school or Jewish day schools. I don't receive any fee assistance, and I don't get any help from grandparents. I pay everything out of our family income, and thankfully at this point in time I can afford to do so. But let's not shy away from the fact that that means in excess of $100,000 a year goes to Jewish education. And it was the position 2021, and I think it was 2014, where we had to make a very tough decision. At that time, we had 2 children of school education age, and they were both at Mount Scopus at that point in time, and we couldn't afford to maintain that position, and we had a choice to make. And our choice was, are we going to sell our house, or are we going to take our children out of Mount Scopus and put them into our local primary school? And our local primary school is Malvern Primary, and we decided that that was what we were going to do. And anyone who knows me will know that Jewish education, Jewish identity is something that both my wife and I hold very dear to our hearts. Someone's got their mic on. Can you please, hold very dear to our hearts. And it was a tough decision. But you know, we've both for years been very involved in our community. And we made the tough call to move our children to Malvern Primary. And it was an interesting experience because it was a very different community, very different world to the one that we were familiar with in a Jewish community. And particularly Malvern Primary, where, yes, 10% of the school population is Jewish. but only 10% compared to, for example, South Caulfield Primary or Caulfield North, where the Jewish population may well be around the 50% or even higher. And so the only Jewish education that they were getting at school was delivered by UJEB, and that was what it was, and we supplemented that by sending our kids to Malvern Chabad, and I see Ruby Cooper is online, and Ruby had the pleasure of educating my son Daniel for some time, and also Lamdani. And both Lamdani and Malvern Chabad offered an outstanding option in terms of providing a Jewish experience. It encompassed both some Hebrew learning and some Jewish education, and was very well received by my kids, and really gave them a greater love of their Judaism. There's no doubt that the experience that they had at Mount Scopus was an enormously important foundation to that Jewish education. And when our daughter finished primary school and then went to Bialik, and our middle son moved to back to Mount Scopus in grade 5, they were able to immediately slip right back in to the education and the environment in which they felt so comfortable. So it is a difficult exercise, because my wife and I, we thought about, what are we going to do? Are we going to approach the schools and say we need help? We decided we were not going to do that. And we felt that that we were making a decision that was really more about what we could or couldn't do, as opposed to what we felt the school needed, or schools needed to do to help us. And hopefully we made the right decision. Certainly everyone's now back in the Jewish day school system. But I think what is critical to this this issue, and Alan, you made the point earlier about you don't understand how people can make this decision. Well, let me tell you, people are making this decision day in and day out, and not so much perhaps amongst my peer group, because my peer group now have all their kids in high school, but in the generation which is 10 years younger than me, I know very few people who are sending their kids to the Jewish day school system, because we are surrounded by state schools, state primary schools, which are excellent in terms of the education that is available. And what is available through Lamdani and Malvern Chabad and Glen Ira Chabad and UJEB and other similar organizations is a genuinely fine, I'm not saying it's great, but a genuinely fine alternative to a formal Jewish education, when at home, at the same time, there is a level of observance, or of not necessarily observance of Jewish law, but observance of Jewish tradition, which inculcates those kids in their Jewishness. Because, and we've read it in the Gen 7, the Gen report, or the Gen 17 report, and the one before that, and so on, that oh, my mind's gone blank. That are readily prepared every year, every few years after we get the census data. What they say is that what matters most of all in terms of Jewish education is what happens at home. As long as families at home maintain that level of Jewish involvement, from observing, lighting the candles on the Friday nights, and perhaps keeping kosher, remembering and doing things around the Chagim and so on. If those things are done, that's going to make a tremendous effort around observing and inculcating these kids with their Jewish identity. Can I say something about community stuff? Obviously, those of you who know me will know that I've been involved in the community for 30 years in one way or another in a leadership position, including president of the Jewish Community Council of Victoria, president of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, and so on. Sticking with my Victorian involvements, I've spoken with Nechama, and I've spoken with Alan, and I've spoken with Kate, and I've spoken with Jeremy Stolinda, and I've spoken with Lisa Kennett, and all these people who are very involved in the various Jewish day schools for many, many years about this very issue. And when I was the JCCV president, we spoke about adopting a program similar to what Yavna has recently adopted in terms of tax deductibility for the Jewish educational component of their school fees. Well, that got knocked back by one or more of the schools. When we attempted in my closing hours of being the JCCV president to establish a Jewish community appeal, which has been something that's been spoken about for decades. It was in the 1993 Commission for the Future report. The merger of schools, which Johnny Baker was, the late Johnny Baker was so much an advocate for, was referred to in the Commission for the Future report, which was authored by Ian Davis and David Smorgan and others. These are not new topics. But again, when the community appeal discussion took place in around about 2010, and Alan, and you recall, I came and spoke to you about it then, and of course you were then wearing the hat of the president of Jewish Care, and we spoke about how, in fact, a Jewish community appeal can benefit the community as well as the issue of Jewish education. But again, it didn't happen because people who were very involved in preparing a report to talk about the feasibility of such a document, who is very involved in your project right now, said it wasn't going to work because we raised more money in Victoria by way of the approach that is currently done compared to a community appeal that's undertaken in New South Wales. In 2000, I think it was 15 or 16, when I remember I wrote an article which was published in the Jewish News about the cost of Jewish education, and then there was this flurry of activity and concern and interest by various members of the community. So, Anton, you've got to do something about this. And I convened parent groups from each of the day schools to actually talk and conduct forums in relation to these matters, and that resulted in meetings with then the with Jeremy Stolinda and with Lisa Kennett and the then treasurer of Mount Scopus, and everyone was very nervous about all of this, and everyone's telling me, oh, the number one issue on the board of our schools is the affordability of Jewish education. Well, not much has changed. We keep talking. And this is the problem with this topic. We just keep talking. Now, let me just say this. I think what Alan and his team are doing is fantastic. It is long overdue, but my concern is it is just going to be another conversation because ultimately it is just going to be too hard. And if we're ultimately going to try and reach a consensus, we ain't going to get there, because my experience with this topic is that each of the schools are going to protect their territory. Sorry, Kate. The reality is, as much as each school wants this issue to be addressed, ultimately each school is going to protect their own jurisdiction, their own territory. It needs to be, and Rabbi Kenneth has told me this many, many times, it needs to be a community approach. And I agree, but ultimately it's only going to work if the donors say it's going to work, because the donors are the one who control the flow of funds to the schools and control what's going to happen in terms of what the schools can or can't do. But even the problem caught up with that, and it's perfectly normal, is the donors have their own allegiances in terms of the various Jewish day schools. So it is a very, very difficult topic. And here's an idea in terms of a fifth option, which is not canvassed in the report, Alan, and it's going to be highly controversial, and people will hate it. But here it is. How much money does this community and the New South Wales Jewish community raise each year that is sent to Israel? $40 million per city. I think that's a fair estimate. Does Israel need that money anymore? They do not. We've heard that said by not the current prime minister, but by previous prime ministers, by previous ambassadors from the state of Israel to this country, that the money that we send is very much appreciated, but ultimately it is not going to make any difference to the economy of the state of Israel. But the reality is, our strong diaspora community, and the fact that Australia probably has the strongest sense of connection with the state of Israel, is because of the fact that we have such a strong Jewish day school system, because we have so many of our kids who go through that system and develop that love for Israel and that appreciation of Israel as our Jewish homeland. Well, if half or more of that $40 million was to actually be invested into our Jewish day school system, so as to support the education for the love of Israel amongst our kids, and thereby maintain that strong diaspora community that we are, that is going to make a far greater contribution to the state of Israel, as well as to alleviating the Jewish education cost, I reckon, than anything else that we can come up with. There you go.
Thank you so much, Anton. I suppose, having worked with you for some 10 plus years now, one thing I like about you is you certainly don't mince your words, and you say things as you feel it, and we appreciate your honesty very much, which is great. From my perspective, certainly before I hand over to Rochelle, I think the very fact that we're able to have this conversation openly and candidly is excellent. And I know that, and I personally have seen that this particular conversation is very broad-based, which is one thing that I guess excites me, that there is a broad-based consultation. And I really agree with you, Anton, that I hope that it does translate into something practical and tangible, whatever the options might be. And that's really what we're all hoping for the sake of our community. So thank you for that presentation very much. What I'd like to do now is hand over to Rochelle. Now, Rochelle is very well placed to ask questions because she is a journalist by profession. And I'm going to ask Rochelle first to ask questions of the panelists directly. So I know the panelists have not been informed of or advised of the questions to begin with, but please, if you can keep your responses brief and succinct, that would be great. And then we'll open it up to the crowd. We've got 65 people online. I'm suggesting that if you'd like to ask a question after Rochelle has asked hers, just use the raise your hand icon in the bottom of Zoom, and then you'll be able to ask it audibly. If you prefer to just post it on the chat, you can do that as well. Rochelle.
Right. I'll ask my first question to Alan, since he spearheaded the report. Alan, I was wondering, are you scared, especially based on what Anton just said, that this might just be a conversation?
Yes, I am. But I'm determined for it not to be.
And what do you think is the next step? Like you spoke about consensus, Anton did as well. How do you get consensus from so?
I think this is a really, really difficult problem. And you listen to Kate and you listen to the other principals, and they make perfect sense, and they're 100% genuine in what they do. I just don't think the problem can be solved by any school on its own. That's what the community's got to understand, that the only solutions will come out of the schools working together, because the problem is too big for any one school to solve. I think that's really important. Often in life, when we've got problems, we want to find someone to blame. And so you find someone convenient to blame, and then the problem's gone away. You think it's not the school's fault. The schools are doing a great job. There's a system that doesn't work, and we as a community have to find a solution to it. So when I produced the first draft of the report and took it to probably 20 community leaders, philanthropists, friends, and said, what do you think? Their answer was, this is fabulous, it's got to be done, but the community is not ready for a merger, and it's not ready for a VCE school. It's not going to happen. If you recommend any of these things, you're going to fail. the community's not ready. They don't understand the nature of the problem yet. They don't understand how bad it's going to get. And they're not ready to make such a bold move because you need a crisis for major change to occur. So the working group agreed with my suggestion that we should play a long game, that we should not make a recommendation, but what the focus of the report should be to describe the problems in a way that people really understand and to set out the options, including the option of the status quo, so that we don't immediately get involved in an argument, because that is an option. We accept that as an option. So what we've then got to do is to get a community of like-minded people together, which is what this is about, that come together in a respectful way, that understand the problem, don't find simple solutions by blaming this one or that one, acknowledge that there's a difficult problem, and think creatively about how we can work together to solve the problems. And I believe that the solutions will emerge, A, through the collaboration. They might be small initially, they might be small adjustments, they might be areas of cooperation between the schools, combined with the fact that it's going to get tougher every year for the schools as more and more children go to the government schools and as the demography kicks in. And then over time, we as a community will be ready to make the change we need to make. So if we'd come out with a recommendation, it would look bold, but it would fail because the community is not ready. We will make recommendations when we think a political consensus has emerged. It doesn't mean everyone has to agree, but there needs to be enough support for an idea for it to happen. A support amongst the schools, not all the schools, but enough of the schools, support amongst the philanthropists, and support in the community. So this is the art of solving a problem. And I'm not guaranteeing we're going to get an outcome. You asked me, am I concerned? Of course I'm concerned. That's the last thing we would want, but it's going to be very hard for us to fail because we're in this for the long haul. We're going to publish a report every year. We're going to keep in everybody's faces in a respectful way for as long as it takes to create the change that we need. So we really can't fail because change is absolutely inevitable. It's a question of when it comes. And if you push for a change before people are ready, they just blame you for being the source of the problem. And I don't want to be the source of the problem. I didn't create the problem. Kate didn't create the problem. None of the schools created the problem. We've got a problem and we've got to understand it. And I think that through that sort of goodwill and respectful engagement between people and creativity and a bit of courage, we'll be able to find small solutions and then bigger solutions over time.
And just one more question. In your opinion, is there kind of a tipping point where it becomes too late to do this? Is this how time pressured is all this?
I don't think there'll be I think because of what we're doing, it's not going to get to a tipping point, because a tipping point is when a school can't pay its bills, right? And a school is financially embarrassed and can't function and can't pay its debts or whatever. I don't think that's going to happen. If we maintain this sort of dialogue in the community, that's not going to happen. And I don't think it's like climate change where it can suddenly be too late. It's never too late in this situation to make changes. So one of the things that I haven't spoken about is feedback we've had that we have taken on board, things that we missed out on, blindsided. Our working group comprises only people who are parents of children in Jewish schools. Talk about being blindsided. We didn't have a single member of the working group who had children in government schools. So we couldn't see the perspective of children in government schools. We didn't engage UJEB enough. We focused on 4 schools and not 11. We had a reason for that, but we also focused on those schools and not Jewish education. So I think all of those things, like UJEB represents Jewish education. If you think about the problem is Jewish education and therefore continuity, maybe you need a Hebrew government school. Maybe you have to work to convert Garden Vale into a Hebrew government school or one of those other schools that have already got a lot of Jewish kids in it to make the experience in a government school for a Jewish child richer than it is at the moment. So we've discovered our blind side, and people have come up with some very creative new ideas, and we're listening. And the beauty of only coming up with options is that we don't have to defend anything. If people say to us, for example, it's impossible to merge the schools. They're too different. Then we say, oh, you support option one. That's fine. That's an option. So we just don't want it to become an argument. We want it to become a problem that we share together, that we're going to solve together.
And based on the feedback you got, what would you say the overwhelming feedback was? Could you put it into sort of two categories, what the schools generally thought, what people at private schools and government schools thought?
Well, I think the schools have been fantastic. They've shared data. They've given us information about every child and what fee they pay, of course, anonymously, child 1, 2, 3, et cetera, et cetera. They've been respectful. They've been fabulous. But you know what? They can't take the next step. It's too hard. And that's because no single school can solve it alone. So the schools say, I think the schools are saying, yes, we've got a problem. Yes, we're doing our best, but we acknowledge that there's a problem. We're glad we got someone who's looking at the problem without blaming us. That's what I think the schools are saying. That's my interpretation. The parents are saying, look, it's too expensive. We can't afford it. That's one group. And another group says, oh, it's not a question of whether we can afford it, but we don't necessarily want to send our Jewish kids to a Jewish school. I'm not sure whether that's rationalization to feel good about the choice that you've got no choice but to make. So that's the sort of reactions we're getting. It's very confusing reactions because we have the schools saying to us, but we give all these, fee subsidies and everything else. And then you've got parents who come to us and say, we can't approach the schools because we find, it undermines our pride. We're too proud to do that. The process is so undignified. I believe both sides. The problem is that a school, it's such an emotional issue. If you could move it out of the school into an independent body that had no interest in the matter, you might be able to break that sort of and also make it anonymous so that you have the assessment by the fee assessment board. It's not a fee assistance board because we wouldn't be paying any money to anyone. It would be people paying what they can afford to pay. So the concept of people being able to get a Jewish education for what they can afford to pay is the overwhelming and my view is that's what the schools should be receiving. They shouldn't be receiving more than a person can pay, and the schools have got to cut their cloth according to the revenue that produces. And if that means in 3 or 4 or 5 years some sort of mergers, that's what it has to be. But to put the amount of pressure that we're putting on some families now in order to subsidize some, but not enough. So there's 4,000 kids, Jewish kids, outside the Jewish school system and 5,000 inside the Jewish school system, which is 9,000. That 9,000 is going to go to 7,000 over the next 20 years.
Yeah. My next question will be for Kate. Okay. And as Kate knows, I've still got a son at Bialik, very happily there. Kate, I want to ask you, has COVID escalated this question in your head? Has these sort of pressures put on parents at the moment changed, therefore, the school's response?
COVID was a really interesting time. At the beginning of last year, we were expecting an influx of families to leave the school because we expected that their financial circumstances were going to be so unsure they just could not feel that they could continue to afford Jewish education. And what we found, that parents rated Jewish education so highly that they sacrificed even other things. And we had very few parents, we didn't have actually anyone leave the school. We also did offer a lot of support. As you know, we offered broad-based discounts, but we also offered bespoke support for families that needed it. It certainly, we've already talked a lot about affordability, but how could COVID not make us focus even more on affordability? And so it didn't present anything new to us, but it just, I guess, made us focus on it even more.
So based on the report moving forward, how are you going to assess what's needed from your perspective? Is it sort of continuing conversation within the school?
We do a lot of financial modelling. We actually have an actuary as our treasurer. And so we have extraordinary data that projects 2 years out, 5 years out, 10 years out. And some of the scenarios are scary. And so I do hear what Alan's saying, and that we do need to be open-minded about change. One thing that we really try and be around the council table is not scared to make changes where required. So we are open, genuinely open to hearing what's out there. And I think with anything, there's always pain. With any kind of compromise, by its very definition, that you don't get the perfect outcome. And we're prepared for that. We're prepared to need to look laterally to make changes if required, but we also don't think the current system is about to collapse tomorrow. We have we're in a sound financial position with good strategies and more emphasis on affordability, on ways to support families further. So yeah, it's a continually journey for us.
Can I ask a question, Rochelle, of Kate? How is that going to play out in reality, given the prized positions that both Bialik College and Mount Scopus occupy in terms of the top performing schools in the state of Victoria? Because surely, as much as we would like to say otherwise, the sorts of things that are being canvassed ultimately can and are likely to impact upon those prized positions.
Why do you think that educational outcomes will be impacted? I'm not following, sorry. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, okay, if you feel that it's not going to be impacted, well, that's good. But it's always been my impression that part of the difficulty in actually being able to advance this issue is because of the fact that schools really are very much driven to be the top in the state, or as
I know this comes across
high up the pedestal as they can possibly be.
It sounds like a cliche, but we really want every child to be their best. And it has given us remarkable educational outcomes, but I can honestly, hand on heart, say that is not what drives us.
And can I say, knowing the support and what is done in respect of one of my kids who's at the school, I'm not doubting that for a moment. I'm not, but I'm concerned that based upon the experiences I've had in dealing with this issue myself in the past, not from my personal perspective, but just from a community perspective, is that what drives the schools is their territorial positioning. To a large extent, and that goes beyond and above what's in the best interest of the community.
We're a cross-communal school, so I feel like we are not welded on to anything that's so dear from us that we can't move away. We're very open-minded in the range of Jewish kids that we have at our school. I'm not sure that we're as closed-minded about changes as you're implying. I do think that we're always open to look at options.
Don't take my suggestion as it's a Bialik thing.
No, I don't. I absolutely don't. And I understand the feeling in the community that the schools always talk about it and never act. But I do think that the financial data shows that we are acting. As an example, over the last 3-4 years, our fee rises after bursaries and scholarships are actually about half the increase. Our income's only gone up by half the amount of our costs. I mean, we are looking at all sorts of ways to be able to achieve that. Now, you can't continually do that on a trajectory because that's not sustainable, but we are making hard moves to try and do what we can. I mean, our dream is to have a foundation corpus that's so large that the interest on that would pay for fee assistance and therefore take that burden away from the middle income families. So we are always looking, and we're open for a communal solution. I mean, how amazing if we could have, I really like the idea of the fee assessment board. I think that has a lot of merit because it is, people do feel, we try and make it as confidential and as easy process as possible. But it can be confronting and people are very proud. So, we do like the idea of removing that somewhat outside the school itself, because then I think people will be less proud and feel more open to it. But even Anton, someone like yourself, I mean, everyone has the right. And so we absolutely respect your decision to have moved your kids to a public school, but we would have absolutely welcomed the opportunity to have sat down with you and your family and anyone a similar family to talk to us about making that possible to have stayed. What we find with a lot of our fee assistance is that it changes over time. And so a family might need a lot of income support at a certain period, but as their careers develop, and maybe later on when one of their kids is leaving, but certainly as they change in their personal circumstances, our fee assistance changes too. Sometimes it's an increase, sometimes it's a decrease, but yeah, I think maybe we have not been great with PR. I think people think that to come to our school is unaffordable. And I think people would be absolutely shocked if they realise just the genuine diversity of economic backgrounds of children at our school. And, you know, we have made it possible for so many people. And, you know, our aim is to continue that journey and possibly communicate that better than we have been. You know, I think we still carry a lot of baggage from being the elitist school. And the data absolutely shows that Bialik is not that today. Absolutely.
So I'll ask now, Anton, given that you said that you'd raised these issues with Alan quite a number of years ago, what did you see as the biggest threat to the way the Jewish schools stand at the moment?
So to be fair, I didn't quite raise this issue with Alan all those years ago. What I raised with Alan was the issue of the need for a Jewish community appeal in Victoria, so as to particularly relieve the burden on fundraising from smaller organisations within the community or organisations that traditionally struggled with fundraising. So spent more time on that than actually delivering the service that they were set up to deliver. And Alan at the time was I think Alan was the president of Jewish Care at the time. And we spoke about how, although Jewish Care itself couldn't fit into that model, but perhaps part of its fundraising efforts could. And I think we spoke about, from memory, it was the aged care services that may well be able to fall within that sort of that sphere. Sorry, what was the second part of your question? Sorry, Rochelle.
Given that your
What's
kids...
your problem with the schools? What do you think the threats are?
I think it's coming back to, Alan, the point you were making beforehand, in respect of we're not at a crisis point. And because we're not at a crisis point, there isn't the real sense of urgency to address this problem. This has been a problem that's been around for a long, long time. I remember when Nina Bassett was the president of the Jewish Community Council of Victoria the first time, right? She set upon a project of seeking to establish an endowment fund, exactly, Kate, like what you were talking about. Not one that wasn't specific to any particular school, but one that was going to be applicable and available across the community, across the schools. And from memory, what made that all too difficult was the realization that that would require some astronomical amount of money to be raised, to be in this fund, so that it just all became too difficult. Of course, that's probably well over 20 years ago. And had that actually been done 20 years later, we may well have some serious funds sitting there that may well now have been able to subsidize school fees to some extent, maybe not to the greatest extent needed, but to some extent. So we keep on kicking this can down the road, which is the sort of the point I was alluding to earlier. It's a discussion that just keeps on going. And Alan, I mean, you said yourself, you have a concern that it's just going to be a discussion. Ultimately, there needs to be a stand taken and a decision made, and there needs to be leadership in relation to the issue. And it needs to be leadership that comes from a part of the community that to some extent financially supports the schools, because the schools are not going to listen until they are told that they have to listen. And until such time as there is a school which is about to fall over the edge, and thankfully we're not there yet, but it will come. And the only question is, which school would it be? Would it be Bialik? Would it be King David? Would it be Scopus? Would it be Yavna? Would it be Yeshiva? Would it be Adas? I don't know. In my view, and this is a view I came to years ago when I was dealing with this issue, and it all just got too hard, was, yes, I agree. The community is not ready for it because we're not in a state of crisis. And the way, unfortunately, the Victorian Jewish community operates is we don't do anything until we're in that state of crisis. We don't have a a planning board or anything strategic of that nature like they do in Sydney. We just sort of float or jerk from one issue to the next without any real sense of planning what our community needs. And that is a big problem for our community.
Alan, I think that a question came from an audience member asking if you considered the modelling from overseas, which I believe you have from Toronto. And can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, there's different things. I mean, that one was the UK one, which I'll talk about, and the Toronto one is whereby they do have a model whereby they have a single VCE school and 8 feeder schools, and that works extremely well. Now, this is inconceivable for us at the moment, and I'm not recommending it, but visualize a new VCE school for the whole community where the entire community comes together for 3 years, where we can reduce the fees by $10,000 a year, and you might even increase the diversity of the junior schools, because we see from Shalom Aleichem, it's not that expensive to run a junior school. It's very expensive to run a senior school. So that's what we learned from Toronto, Chat, I think it's called, the Chat school. Now, the other thing is the UK model. Australia is more like France in the separation of church and state. The government will not allow religious education in the state schools. So they've even banned religious education, and that was the problem that UJEB went through in 2015. In the UK, it's different. The government will allow a government-funded Jewish school. What Australia will accept, and this is really important, is a Hebrew government school. There's a French government school, there's a German government school, there's a Japanese government school, but there isn't a Hebrew government school. Now imagine if Garden Vale or one of the other 3 or 4 schools in that area was converted into a Hebrew government school where it's attended by Jewish children and non-Jewish children, but it's a language school. And it focuses on Hebrew as a language. And around Hebrew, you can have a bit of culture. And before 9 o'clock and after 3 o'clock, you can have a bit of religion and Zionism as well, because they don't care if you do it outside school hours. So we could construct a Hebrew government school to make the experience for those who either don't want to go to a Jewish school or can't afford to go to a Jewish school, to go to a government school, but to get a richer Jewish education and a Hebrew education. So that's an option that we did not consider because we were blindsided, because everyone on our working group was only thinking about Jewish schools, rather than what can we do for the 4,000 children who are not in Jewish schools? How can we improve their experience? And of course, UJEB, since I've published the report, I've got to know Gabby Crafty and the amazing work that UJEB does. And, you know, we should fund UJEB more, and we should try to create a Hebrew government school. Is not that hard. This community has enough political clout with the government to get that done. So there are really interesting ideas that are emerging out of this consultation. You've heard Kate say she's amenable to consider a fee assessment board. That is an incredibly welcome statement from her. I had a session with Rabbi Kennard a couple of weeks ago where he said, we're open to mergers. We know that this sort of thing's going to have to happen. We shouldn't be negative, Anton. We should be positive, because, and I'm not complaining. What I'm saying is that just because you've failed once or twice doesn't mean you're not going to succeed on the 3rd attempt. When we merged Jewish Community Services and Montefiore Homes, I was told this is impossible because we've tried it 3 times and we failed every time. And I said, it was those failures that's going to make it possible to succeed this time, because we learned that you do this and you don't do that, and you've got to be patient. You've got to bring people along. You can't be rude to people. You know, you can't threaten people. You've got to find a pathway where everybody's a winner. Now, I know that the schools will do things that they can do, but they won't do things that they can't do. And that's reasonable. They have a responsibility, which we have to respect. They have to manage their school as best as they can. That's their job. And to complain about that is ridiculous. You've got to accept that. That's why we've created the working group. Our job is to try to convince the community and the school that there's a better way to do it if we think of all these things as one. And we'll come up with ideas. Some will work, some won't work. We'll get cooperation between the schools. And when I said before, of course, we cannot fail to fail, because the crisis is coming and it's inevitable. that we're going to have to make change. I'm completely convinced of that. How much work we do in preparation determines how chaotic that change is, how effective that change is, how useful that change is, how we minimize the amount of harm to students whose lives are disrupted through that process. That's what this is about.
So I think Rabbi Glassman would like to open up the floor to people who've got questions. So Rabbi, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Rochelle. I do appreciate that. If there's anyone who'd like to ask a question via the audio, I will ask that you just raise your hand in the little bar at the bottom. You're able to do it. And if not, that's also okay, because we've had a very robust and open conversation, and I think that's really fantastic. So I'll just give it a second to see if anyone would like to ask a question. If you don't know how to do the raise hand icon, then just unmute yourself and go for it. Okay.
Hi.
So, yes.
Hi, Anthony Felber. The schools need to stop competing with each other, stop advertising against each other, sort of reflect some of the things that the shules are doing with each other when it comes to the Yom Tovim. You know, who's got the bigger, better choir? The first move's got to come from within the school boards, the school councils, to almost like an interfaith meeting. They have to do it, not working with the external group, but there has to be movement from within each school council itself to institute it, I think.
I respond to that. So the schools are in communication with each other, which has been really positive. The Australian Council of Jewish Schools give us a platform that both presidents and also principals get together in their groups to communicate about things. I also think that your comment about being less competitive with each other is absolutely right. I see our greatest opportunity is bringing in students from outside the current Jewish system. That surely is what our community needs. If we're not in Jewish education, you know, we're volunteers. We're not in Jewish education to because we want, in my example, for Bialik to be the best. I'm involved in my kids' Jewish school because I'm passionate about Jewish education. I want more children to come into Jewish education. And then we're not a race towards the bottom on stealing a child from here or there. If we can, increase our mission by educating more Jewish children, but then it also subsidizes everyone else. So I think our focus absolutely needs to be bringing more children into the Jewish schools. And understandably, that's not for everyone. And we must be very careful never to judge people that don't want to come into the Jewish school system. But I think it's clear, if nothing else but on social media's response to this report, that many people would love the opportunity and they feel that they can't. And it's incumbent upon us to show them a way how they can. And whether it's through the fee assessment board or other ways, that is the way out of here. It's a way to go against the change in demographics that Alan has shown is coming. We can increase the number of kids in Jewish schools, not decrease, if we act together and we're strategic.
Yaakov, can I ask a question of Alan?
Yes, of course. It's open to the audience.
Well, I do need to respond to something that Anthony just said. He said it's like shuls competing with each other, and of course, Alan, there's no competition. Anthony, you know, there's no competition because St Kilda Shule is the best. So,
It's quiet anyway.
But my question, I suppose, and it's just a sort of a thought bubble, Alan. We've been talking about, and there seems to be a growing enthusiasm about this idea of an independent fee assessment board. But what if that board went beyond that and it was an offer assistance board?
Yeah, very good question, Anton. We would establish it as a scholarship fund and we would get DGR status for it. And we would encourage the philanthropists. We would create a fund for each of the schools and a general fund. And we would encourage the philanthropists to increase their giving and maybe to support the fee assessment board, because there's many weaknesses with the fee assessment board that we're going to have to work our way through. But one of them is, okay, so people are assessed, and this one's worth 18 or can pay 18, this one's 12, and this one's 22, this one's 9. Are we really going to allocate spaces purely on people's capacity to pay? is there no merit or equity basis? And so what I want to do is convince the philanthropists that we've got to have a good pool of money going through that system so that we can also allow someone who can only pay $5,000 or $2,000 to be topped up, to make it easier for the school to accept that child. As Kate says, they only get $5,000. There are other schools that get 14 and more, up to $20,000 per child from the government. But because, you know, Scopus and Bialik in particular are seen as rich schools, they don't get much. So they really can't afford to take too many children at too low a fee, because if you add more children who are producing less, and I'm talking commercially, less revenue than they cost, yes, the school's going to go out of business very quickly. So I think we'll be able to bring in, I think, lots of students whose ability to pay fees combined with what the government gives is a really good boost for the school's revenue. Yeah. But we shouldn't just do it on financial terms alone. And so the things that I want to do is I want to find out how many parents really are interested, because it's easy to speak. I want to talk to the philanthropists and I want to talk to the schools. And then we'll come up with a range of options, just like our working group paper had a range of options. We'll have a range of options for the fee assessment board, and then bring together the schools and the philanthropists and people who are interested and say, let's workshop this. Let's see what it looks like. We're not going to recommend it. We're just going to workshop it and then see if you get enough of a consensus, enough momentum, you'll be able to do it. So I think that it's a process of persuasion, exciting people. You know, when we bring extra income into the schools, they'll be able to reduce the fees for the top fee paying students as well. They are a not-for-profit. If they get an extra dollar, they're going to pass it on as savings to the students. So it's a good suggestion, and it's one that we want to take up. And I think the philanthropists will like it, because what they will see is, by supporting it, they're supporting cooperation between the schools, where the schools are all winners. No one's a loser. No one's a bully. Yeah. We don't want to be bullies to tell the schools, you've got to do this or you've got to do that. We've got to be creative to find ways where everyone's a winner. And I think there is a pathway in that. And eventually, when it comes to mergers, if the situation becomes difficult, you can get excited about different types of solutions. You can get excited about a single VCE school. So it's absolutely the best, where the whole community comes together. You might have a camp at the beginning of it, you know, at the end of year 9, at the beginning of year 10, a camp for every child in the community, whereby we create a really cohesive community, rather that was a Yavna kid and that was a King David kid. So you can create visions of different futures that can be exciting, particularly if you're under a lot of pressure. So we have to find creative solutions.
Thank you. Thank you for that response, Alan, and for your question, Anton. I am mindful of the time. There are a couple of hands that have come up, so I think we have time just for one or two more questions. Elon Zlotnik, please, you're welcome to unmute.
Thank you, Rabbi Glassman. My experience of the Jewish schools in Melbourne is largely informed by the school that I went through, which was Carmel School in Western Australia. Carmel School provided me, and certainly many others, with a fantastic secular education, second to none, frequently topping or coming within the top 5 of the state, and also an outstanding Jewish education to a very wide cross-section of the community, being the only Jewish day school. The school is probably also best described as really, certainly when I went through, a bit of a no-frills school. We did not have any swimming pools. We did not have any auditoriums. The subjects that were on offer were the key subjects that one had to undertake in order to go through the equivalent of VCE. A lot of the discussion that we've had has really focused on finding fee assistance options. And although there's been some discussion about, I guess, reducing cost through the suggestion of some kind of a merged school for years 9 or 10 onwards, I just wonder how much consideration has been given to actually looking at the cost base of each of the schools individually, and really, really critically looking at how that cost base can come down. I mean, certainly in the course of doing tours of a number of the schools, not all. I've been very, very impressed with the facilities on offer. I've been very impressed with the large number of subjects on offer as well. And we heard from Alan that there are some courses that are being run with 2, 3, 4 students in them, and clearly such courses can't be profitable. So my question really is, how much effort has really gone into looking at ways of making our schools cost base significantly less than what they are? Because I struggle to see how doing anything else is going to provide a long-term solution for our community. The beneficiaries, the philanthropists that are ultimately going to have to fund any board to provide fee assistance are just going to have to fund a greater delta, to the extent that we're not dealing with the actual cost, the underlying cost. I mean, the proposition of asking people such as myself with 3 children to spend, as Anton shared with us, $100,000 after tax to give 3 children a private Jewish education. It's not well beyond most people. It's well beyond almost the entire community, except a very, very small percentage. And so I think for me, I'm really interested to know what is being done to look at the costs that each of our schools are incurring. I mean, we've heard that the biggest expense for schools is the cost of staff, and I've seen some job advertisements from some of the schools, and the ratio of teachers to students is staggering.
Elon, could you mind if I?
Sorry, Elon, I was just going to ask you specifically what the question is, just in one line.
Looking at reducing costs of each of the schools, what effort is being done to do that? Sure.
Can I answer? You spoke about the staff, the high ratios, and it is true. Earlier I spoke about the high number, the 30% of students in our school that have some sort of disability, most of them learning. And that really takes an intense amount of staff to make them be their best. So we really pride ourselves in helping every child reach their potential. And that is why we have such really high staff ratios. And absolutely, it does add to cost, but it's such an important focus for us to allow every child to have the support that they do require. You spoke about the fancy facilities, and it is true. I mean, a lot of the Jewish schools have beautiful facilities. It is important to note that most of the funding from that actually comes from donors. You know, we have large capital campaigns, that those donors aren't necessarily prepared to put money into affordability. Rightly or wrongly, a donor has the right to decide where their funds go, and a lot do prefer to go into buildings. And so I think the beautiful buildings that you do see are not necessarily, coming, from the parents themselves, or there are portions of that. I also take you back to Western Australia with Carmel, and I think the fact that there's only one Jewish school there means that there's no competition from within the Jewish community wanting to send their kids to a Jewish school that has a pool versus not. And so, rightly or wrongly, I think that's helped keep Carmel out of this competition between the schools. Probably their greatest competition would be from, obviously, other private schools that might have fancier facilities. But if a family really only wants a Jewish facility, they're going to send their child there, and they don't need to be putting all those funds into their facilities. So I think it is correct when someone earlier said that the Jewish schools, there is competition between them. That is true, and as we also have competition, we lose some students to other private schools. In fact, we're looking at our data recently, and we've been quite surprised to see that the number of students that we lose are often not going to public schools, which you would imagine that's what happens if it's an affordability issue. They're actually going to other private schools, and not in large numbers, but certainly that is part of the competition that is in our marketplace, that we have to be aware of that too.
Thank you. Thank you, Alon, for your thoughtful question, and Kate for your considered answer. Look, I am cognizant of the time. We are heading well past 9:30, which was the intended finish time. I do acknowledge that there is still a hand up and a question that was posted on the chat. What I would ask is that if anyone does have any outstanding questions, I know one thing is that you are able to contact the Jewish Schools Project Committee, certainly by their website, via email or via Facebook, etc. I would like to say that when I first saw the report that was emailed to me, I read it cover to cover, and the one thing that really struck me was the the humble tone of the report, which was not seeking to, put forward recommendations and say, this is what it's going to be, these are the options, take it or leave it. But it really was a grassroots initiative, and is a grassroots initiative that's genuinely seeking to get people's actual genuine feedback. And I think that, this session, yes, it's one unique to St Kilda Shule, but there have been multiple sessions all across the community, and there are several to come. And I think that itself speaks volumes. The process speaks enormously to the value with which the committee members value the feedback from the community, which really are the major stakeholders. So I just wanted to thank firstly you, Alan, as the chairperson of the committee, and Nechama for your drive. I know that you've been together on many of these sessions, and we really do appreciate your time. Thank you so much. I also wanted to thank Kate and Anton for your presentations and for the honesty and sincerity with which you presented them, and Rochelle as well for putting your Q&A skills to the test, which was done with distinction. So we thank you very much for that. And perhaps most importantly, to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight. Let this not be the end of the conversation. Let it be a continuation, but most importantly, as we all hope that it will translate into something tangible, please God, in the future. And as Alan said, and I fully endorse this, failure is only a bad thing if it's not followed up by another attempt. And eventually as a community, we will get there. So thank you all once again for your attendance. I wanted to wish each and every one of you a Shana Tova Umatuka, a happy, healthy, and sweet New Year. If Anton, you said we've got to bring the Jewishness into our home. So I do know that if you want the shofar blown right in front of your house, you can all order that online with, I think it's the Project High Holidays website. You'll find it on Facebook. It's an excellent program. And you can up here on Inkerman Street, we're going to need a shofar blown up and down. But if you're in a quiet suburban leafy area, bring some joy to your non-Jewish neighbors. Just book it in the daytime and not at night. Thank you all once again very much. We are going to end now, and really appreciate your time. Shana Tova to one and all. Thank you.
Shana Tova.